"Meet my future," Miles announced with a smirk, his hand possessively resting on the small of Shelley's back. "Isn't she magnificent?" Those cutting words hung in the air of Le Chateau Blanc, shattering the meticulously planned 26th anniversary dinner I'd spent months organizing. A quarter-century of marriage reduced to a cruel introduction on what should have been our special night. The champagne flutes on our table caught the candlelight as I watched them settle into their seats across from me. Shelley's auburn hair gleamed under the restaurant's crystal chandeliers as she slid into what should have been my husband's chair beside me. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Miles sat across from me instead, already reaching for the 2007 Krug I'd ordered, our traditional anniversary champagne. His casual confidence was breathtaking. He truly believed he was in control of this situation, if only he knew what was coming. What Miles didn't realize as he poured 3 glasses of champagne with practiced elegance was that Shelley's designer dress would be her last outfit of the evening. The restaurant's warm lighting caught the emerald, tennis bracelet on her wrist, my grandmother's bracelet which had mysteriously vanished from my jewelry box 2 months ago. How fitting that she'd chosen to wear it tonight? "I thought we should clear the air, May," Miles continued, his voice carrying that authoritative tone he'd perfected in medical conferences worldwide. "No need to drag this out with lengthy proceedings. The papers will be delivered tomorrow." Shelley shifted uncomfortably in her seat, perhaps sensing something in my too calm demeanor. She was young, barely 30, but old enough to know better. Old enough to understand that some lines shouldn't be crossed, old enough to face the consequences of her choices. "Of course," I replied, lifting my champagne glass with a steady hand. "To new beginnings." The irony of my toast was lost on them, both. Miles smiled, clearly pleased with how maturely I was handling the situation. He had always underestimated me, assumed my quiet strength was weakness, my patience was passivity. The next few hours would change everything. Each second that ticked by brought us closer to the moment when their perfect little world would implode. The evidence was already in place. The pieces had been moving for months. While they'd been enjoying their secret rendezvous and plotting their grand reveal, I'd been orchestrating something far more intricate. I excused myself to the restroom, maintaining my composure as I felt their eyes on my back. The midnight blue dress I wore, Miles's favorite when we attended medical galas, suddenly felt like armor. In the elegant bathroom mirror, I checked my reflection. Not a hair out of place, not a smudge in my carefully applied makeup. The woman, staring back at me, looked polished, controlled, and dangerous. Tonight wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of something else entirely. Shelley would indeed never see Miles again after this evening, but not for the reasons anyone might suspect. As I returned to the table, I allowed myself a small smile. Sometimes the perfect revenge requires the perfect audience. The night was still young, and I had plans for both of them. I retook my seat, watching as they exchanged confident glances over their champagne flutes. My phone buzzed quietly in my clutch, right on schedule. In precisely 30 minutes, everything they had built their little fantasy upon would start to crumble. Miles would learn the true meaning of future, and Shelley. Well, Shelley would learn that some roles weren't worth playing. "Tell me, Shelley," I said, leaning forward slightly, "how long have you been wearing my grandmother's bracelet?" The color drained from both their faces, and I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. This was just the first domino. By midnight, their world would be unrecognizable. The maitre d' approached our table with practiced grace, carrying a sealed envelope. Right on time. "Madame," he said, presenting it to me with a slight bow. "As requested." Miles's brow furrowed in confusion. He hadn't noticed that I'd been quietly running this show all along. How amusing that he still thought this evening was his idea. I picked up my champagne glass one final time, savoring the moment. Shall we begin? I opened the envelope with deliberate slowness, aware of Miles's increasingly anxious stare. The memories of our shared past flashed through my mind as I pulled out the contents. Photographs, documents, and a USB drive that made Shelley's perfectly glossed lips part in surprise. "What is this?" Miles demanded, his clinical confidence wavering for the first time that evening. "History," I replied simply, laying out the first photograph. It was from our wedding day, 26 years ago. We looked radiant, young, and hopelessly in love. "Do you remember what you promised that day, Miles?" His jaw tightened. Of course he remembered. Miles never forgot anything. That was part of what made him such a successful neurosurgeon. That same meticulous memory had once made him a thoughtful husband, noting every anniversary, every preference, every small detail that made our marriage special. "That's ancient history," he said dismissively, but his eyes lingered on the photo. I laid out another photograph, this one from 3 years ago, a medical conference in Vienna where I first noticed something was off. Miles's hand resting a fraction too long on his research assistant's shoulder. Not Shelley, her predecessor. That's when the pattern had started. 8 months after this, I continued, placing another photo on the table. "You began working late. Every Tuesday and Thursday. You said it was for the longitudinal brain imaging study. Interesting timing, wasn't it?" I turned to Shelley, whose confident smile had begun to fade. "That's when you were hired as the new lab coordinator, correct?" Miles's face darkened. "If you're trying to create a scene—" "Oh no," I interrupted softly. "I'm not creating anything. I'm revealing. There's a difference." I pulled out another document, bank statements. "Like how you revealed our marriage was over tonight. I'm revealing how you've been diverting research funds through shell companies for the past 16 months. The champagne glass in his hand froze halfway to his lips. Shelley's eyes widened, darting between Miles and the documents. "You always said I didn't understand your work," I continued, each word carefully measured. "But you forgot something crucial, darling. Before I became your wife, I was one of the top forensic accountants in the country. Those late nights you spent with Shelley? I spent mine following your paper trail. The memories of those sleepless nights washed over me. Each discovery had been another crack in the foundation of our marriage, but instead of breaking me, they had forged something stronger. Every betrayal had become a weapon in my arsenal. Those gifts you've been lavishing on Shelley, the bracelet you stole from my grandmother's collection, the penthouse apartment, the offshore account in her name, they're all traceable to embezzled research grants." Shelley's face had lost all color now. "Miles, you said those funds were legitimate. You said—" "Quiet," he snapped, but the damage was done. The first crack in their united front had appeared. As I watched their perfect evening crumble, I felt no joy, only the cold certainty that justice was finally being served. After tonight, nothing would ever be the same, for any of us. Looking back, I should have noticed the subtle shift in Miles's behavior 18 months earlier. Small changes that seemed insignificant in isolation, but formed a pattern when viewed through the lens of hindsight. It began with his phone. Miles, who had always left his device casually on tables or countertops, suddenly developed an attachment to it. Password protected, notifications silenced, and always within reach, even during our rare moments together. When I reached for it, once to take a photo, his reaction was immediate and disproportionate, snatching it from my hand with an excuse about patient confidentiality. Then came the late nights. The Alzheimer's research project demanded extra hours, a reasonable explanation from a dedicated neurosurgeon. But the pattern was specific: Tuesdays and Thursdays, never varying, regardless of patient loads or research milestones. When I suggested bringing dinner to his office one Thursday evening, his refusal was polite but firm. "Too much distraction," he claimed. The security log I later obtained showed his keycard hadn't accessed the research wing that entire evening. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Our 25th anniversary passed with a perfunctory dinner and a distracted gift. A scarf in a color I never wore, still bearing the gift receipt from a boutique located suspiciously close to the hospital. Miles checked his watch throughout the meal, his mind clearly elsewhere. The following day, his credit card statement showed a charge at Le Chateau Blanc, a dinner for two at the restaurant's most secluded table, hours after he'd left our celebration claiming exhaustion. Financial discrepancies appeared next. Small. Withdrawals from our joint account that Miles attributed to expenses without elaboration. Unexplained charges at jewelry stores justified as gifts for donors' wives. A new credit card statement delivered in a plain envelope with no corporate logo, which he quickly tucked into his briefcase when I entered his study. A familiar scent on his collar one evening, a distinctive perfume I didn't wear. When questioned, he blamed the close quarters of the hospital elevator with overly fragrant staff. The same scent lingered in his car weeks later. The breaking point came during the Neuroscience Foundation Gala. Miles was accepting an award for his groundbreaking research, work I'd heard surprisingly little about despite his previous habit of discussing projects in detail. As he approached the podium, a young woman at table 7 adjusted her dress with a gesture I recognized immediately. The same nervous habit Miles had once told me he found endearing in me. Their eyes met briefly as he passed her table, a glance lasting only seconds but conveying a familiar intimacy impossible to mistake. I watched her throughout his speech, noting how she mouthed certain phrases along with him, suggesting she'd heard his acceptance remarks before. My husband had rehearsed his speech for someone, but it hadn't been me. That night, I awoke at 3 a.m. to find Miles's side of the bed empty. His laptop sat open on his desk, carelessly unlocked, a rare oversight. The email on screen was addressed to S with the subject line, "Tomorrow's presentation." The message contained only a time and room number, but the reply below it read, "Can't wait to see you shine, Dr. C. I'll wear the earrings." The sender's email contained no name, only initials, AK. I closed the laptop exactly as I'd found it and returned to bed, lying awake until Miles returned an hour later claiming he'd been reviewing patient files. The careful way he avoided my eyes told me everything his words didn't. The next morning, I opened my jewelry box to find my grandmother's emerald bracelet missing. When questioned, Miles suggested I had misplaced it, offering to buy a replacement with an impatience that bordered on hostility. 2 days later, I spotted the same distinctive piece on the wrist of a woman hurrying from Miles's office as I arrived unannounced, a woman who avoided my gaze and disappeared into the elevator before I could speak. Her hospital ID badge read, Shelley Klein, Development Office, a division that had no obvious reason to meet privately with the chief of neurosurgery. That evening, I made a decision. The woman I had been for 25 years, the supportive wife, the patient partner, the willfully blind believer in my husband's integrity, died quietly as I sat at our kitchen table. In her place emerged someone else, the forensic accountant who had once traced complex financial crimes, the prosecutor who had built unassailable cases against seemingly untouchable figures. Miles had forgotten, or perhaps never truly understood, who he had married. He saw only what he wanted to see, a trophy wife who had sacrificed her career for his, a convenient accessory to his professional ascent. He didn't recognize that those investigative skills hadn't disappeared. They had merely been redirected to support his ambitions rather than expose his flaws. Until now. The moment everything changed wasn't dramatic or climactic. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when I stumbled upon the irrefutable proof of Miles's betrayal, not with a confrontation or tearful revelation, but with a mundane household task, sorting the mail. a plain envelope addressed to our home caught my attention, unusual among the glossy medical journals and formal invitations that typically filled our mailbox. No return address, just our street information precisely typed. Inside was a single receipt, a jewelry store invoice for a custom-designed emerald tennis bracelet, dated our last anniversary. The description matched my grandmother's heirloom exactly, but this was a new piece, a replica commissioned 3 months earlier. The customer's signature was unmistakably Miles's hasty scrawl. Someone wanted me to know. I sat at the kitchen island, the receipt before me, as still and cold as the marble surface beneath my hands. The house's silence seemed to amplify the thundering of my heartbeat. For 26 years, I had built my life around this man, around us. The magnitude of his deception was staggering. Not just the affair, but the calculated theft of a family heirloom to be replicated for his mistress. I poured myself a glass of water, my movements mechanical as my mind processed this new reality. The water trembled slightly as I raised it to my lips, the only visible sign of the earthquake reshaping my internal landscape. That evening, I accessed Miles's study while he attended a hospital board meeting. The room had once been our shared space. Now it was his domain, a subtle shift that had occurred so gradually I'd barely noticed. Among his meticulously organized papers, I found bank statements for accounts I didn't recognize, transfer records to offshore entities, and research data that looked suspiciously uniform, too perfect for authentic scientific results. An unmarked folder contained correspondence between Miles and a Dr. K about manipulating patient outcomes for the Alzheimer's study. The betrayal expanded beyond our marriage into his professional ethics, into patient care, into the foundations of medical research I had always believed he held sacred. In that moment, standing among the evidence of his double life, I made a choice. I wouldn't confront him immediately, wouldn't give him the opportunity to destroy evidence or construct explanations. I would be methodical, thorough, and patient. Qualities that had once made me an exceptional forensic accountant and prosecutor. I carefully replaced everything exactly as I'd found it, then went to our bedroom and stood before the full-length mirror. The woman reflected back was someone I barely recognized, hair-styled as Miles preferred, wearing clothes he had selected, living in a carefully curated existence designed to complement his image rather than express my own identity. "No more," I whispered to my reflection. The next morning, I called in a favor from an old colleague at the FBI who owed me from a case we'd worked together years before. Kelly agreed to meet me at a coffee shop 3 towns over, neutral territory, where Miles would never accidentally encounter us. "I need surveillance," I told her over cappuccinos, my voice steady despite having slept only 2 hours the night before. "Everything you can get on Dr. Miles Campbell and Riverside Memorials, Research Department Finances." Kelly studied my face, her experience in law enforcement allowing her to read between the lines. "This isn't just about infidelity, is it?" "It never is with men like Miles," I replied, sliding her the photographed documents I'd discovered. "Give me 3 months. I'll prove there's something bigger." That evening, Miles returned home late as usual, kissing my cheek absent-mindedly before heading to his study. I served dinner with practiced ease, asking about his day with the perfect blend of interest and deference he had come to expect. "The new fundraising coordinator is making remarkable progress," he mentioned between bites of the salmon he didn't notice I'd overcooked. "Shelley has innovative approaches to donor relations." I nodded, my expression pleasantly neutral, while inside I cataloged the name. Shelley. My first confirmed identification of the woman wearing my grandmother's bracelet. "Perhaps I could help," I offered. "I miss being involved with the hospital community." Miles hesitated almost imperceptibly. "You've never seemed interested in development work before." "People change," I answered simply. Later, as Miles slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling and made a vow to myself. I would give myself 1 week of grief, 7 days to privately mourn the marriage I thought I had, the husband I believed in, the life we'd built together. And then, on the 8th day, I would begin building something else. A case so meticulous, so irrefutable, that when I finally confronted him, there would be no escape. For now, I would be the perfect wife, maintaining the illusion Miles had come to take for granted. The very invisibility he had imposed on me would become my greatest advantage. The hunt had begun. I withdrew another photo from the envelope, this one from just 6 months ago, our last happy moment together, or so I'd thought. We were at the Neuro Innovation Gala, smiling for the cameras, my hand resting lightly on his arm as flashbulbs captured what appeared to be the perfect power couple. My cobalt blue gown had been selected specifically to complement Miles's award, the Distinguished Neurosurgery Innovation Medal gleaming on his chest. The photographers had called us medicine's golden pair that evening. "You remember this night, don't you?" I asked, my voice carrying just enough to be heard by the diners at nearby tables who were beginning to notice our intense conversation. A woman in her 60s with a diamond necklace paused mid-bite, her fork hovering between her plate and mouth as she strained to hear. "It was the same evening you approved the transfer of $1.2 million from the Alzheimer's research grant to our Cayman account." Miles's hand was shaking now, though he tried to hide it by setting down his champagne glass. A drop of condensation slid down the crystal flute, pooling on the white tablecloth, a tiny imperfection in his otherwise perfect staging. The restaurants. Soft lighting caught his wedding band as his fingers twitched, the gold gleaming accusingly. "Whatever you think you found—" "Oh, I found everything," I said, finally allowing a hint of steel to enter my voice. "Every transaction, every fake invoice, every falsified research expense. The $340,000 diverted from the Parkinson's trial that never existed. The equipment purchases for lab instruments that were never delivered. The consulting fees to Shell, companies that all trace back to your personal holdings." I placed each document before him as I spoke, creating a damning mosaic across our anniversary tablecloth. "Did you really think I spent the last year just waiting at home playing the dutiful surgeon's wife?" The maitre d' hovered nearby, sensing tension but unwilling to interrupt what was clearly a private matter among the restaurant's elite clientele. His eyes darted nervously between us, likely calculating the potential damage to the establishment's reputation if this scene escalated. He gestured subtly to a waiter who redirected a couple requesting seating to a table farther from ours. Le Chateau Blanc had been Miles's choice for many of our celebrations over the years. The cream-colored walls with their gold accents, the hand-painted ceiling murals depicting scenes from French aristocratic life, the crystal chandeliers that cast everyone in the most flattering light, all designed to make diners feel part of an exclusive world. How appropriate that this temple to exclusivity and appearance would become the stage for exposing the elaborate facade of our marriage. The memories of our early years together surfaced unbidden. Midnight study sessions during medical school, me bringing Miles coffee as he pored over neuroanatomy textbooks, the smell of highlighter pens and instant noodles forming the backdrop of our courtship. The cramped apartment we shared during his residency, where I'd create financial models by day and help him prepare case presentations by night, our ambitions seamlessly intertwined. The simple joy of our first real apartment together before the accolades and wealth, when success meant paying off a student loan installment with enough left for takeout from the Thai restaurant that knew our order by heart. We had celebrated his first major publication at a chain restaurant with paper napkins, toasting with happy hour wine specials, giddy with the promise of our future. That night still burned in my memory, his eyes alight with genuine passion for his research, his hand warm on mine as he vowed to change patients' lives. When had that idealistic doctor transformed into this creature before me, who saw patients as data points and me as a disposable accessory? Beneath those golden memories lay the truth I'd uncovered. A man so consumed by prestige and ego that he'd sacrificed everything we'd built together. The grant applications I'd helped him perfect, the late-night editing sessions improving his eye, journal submissions, the social connections I'd leveraged to advance his career, all now seemed like investments in a fraudulent enterprise. "Your father always warned you about me," I mused, watching as various emotions played across Miles's face. Shock, anger, calculation, and finally, a flicker of fear. He said someone with my background in financial crimes investigation would never make a suitable doctor's wife. He was right, wasn't he? Just not in the way he imagined. The mention of his father, the legendary surgeon Dr. Lawrence Campbell, whose shadow Miles had never quite escaped, hit exactly as intended. Miles's jaw tightened, the muscle pulsing beneath his carefully maintained 5 o'clock shadow. His father had opposed our marriage, concerned that my investigative mind would scrutinize the Campbell family's medical dynasty too closely. The irony that his suspicion had ultimately proved justified wasn't lost on either of us. Shelley started to stand, her designer dress catching slightly on the chair as she reached for her purse. The emerald bracelet, my grandmother's heirloom, slid down her wrist, catching the light in a way that seemed almost deliberately taunting. I raised a hand to stop her, the gesture casual but unmistakably commanding. I wouldn't leave just yet. The hospital ethics board members in the private dining room might have some questions for you about those research assistant timesheets you've been falsifying. 60-hour weeks logged when you were actually in Bermuda with Miles. Patient consultations recorded during times you were documentably shopping on Rodeo Drive with my credit card. I laid out another document, printouts of security camera timestamps, juxtaposed with billing records, her signature clearly visible on both. Around us, the restaurant's ambient sounds, the gentle clink of silverware, the murmur of conversation, the subtle notes of the piano in the corner, seemed to fade as our drama commanded the room's invisible attention. A couple at the next table quickly averted their eyes when I glanced in their direction, pretending they hadn't been listening to every word. The woman tucked her hair behind her ear, a nervous gesture that revealed the diamond earrings Miles had helped me select for our 10th anniversary, a matching pair to the ones now conspicuously absent from my own ears, having mysteriously disappeared from my jewelry box 3 months ago. The restaurant's ambient noise seemed to have diminished, as though the entire establishment was collectively holding its breath. Even the sommelier paused while decanting wine at a nearby table, his practiced movements temporarily forgotten as he strained to catch our conversation. The blood drained from Miles's face as realization dawned. All those months he thought he'd been cleverly hiding his affairs, both romantic and financial. He'd actually been weaving the rope for his own undoing. The time for presenting evidence was coming to an end. Now came the moment to act decisively. I gathered my composure, knowing that what happened next would determine not just the end of my marriage, but the beginning of justice. With one final glance at their shocked faces, I made my move. As I turned to leave, I caught my reflection in the restaurant's ornate mirror. The woman staring back bore little resemblance to the trusting bride of 26 years ago, or even to the respected financial consultant I'd become. This woman was something else entirely, a fusion of all my past roles, hardened by betrayal and sharpened by purpose. As I walked away from the table, I could hear the FBI agents beginning their rehearsed lines. "Dr. Campbell, Miss Kirkland, we need you to come with us." But I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Everything that would unfold now had been meticulously planned over the past 8 months. The maitre d' handed me my coat with a knowing smile. He'd been well compensated for his role tonight, ensuring our table was perfectly positioned within view of the restaurant's security cameras. Every word, every gesture, every document I'd presented had been carefully recorded. Additional evidence for the prosecution. In my car, I pulled out my secure phone and sent a single text. Checkmate. Within minutes, digital copies of all of Miles's fraudulent transactions would be released to every major medical journal and ethics board in the country. The morning headlines were already written. But this wasn't a plan born of sudden inspiration. No, it had taken shape during those long, sleepless nights after I'd first discovered Miles's deception. I remember the exact moment, finding a receipt for an emerald bracelet I'd never received, dated our last anniversary. That single slip had unraveled everything. I'd given myself 1 week to grieve. 7 days of tears and rage hidden behind closed doors. On the 8th day, I'd begun to plan. The first step had been reaching out to Kelly, my old colleague from the FBI. "I need surveillance," I told her over coffee in a quiet cafe 3 towns over. "Everything you can get on Dr. Miles Campbell and Riverside Memorial's Research Department finances." Kelly had been hesitant initially. "This isn't just about infidelity, is it?" she'd asked, studying my face. "It never is with men like Miles," I replied. "Give me 3 months. I'll prove there's something bigger." Those 3 months had been a master class in deception. While Miles thought I was throwing myself into corporate consulting work to cope with our increasingly distant marriage, I was actually building a case. Every late night at the office had been spent tracing money trails, documenting suspicious patterns and connecting dots that painted a damning picture. I'd hired private investigators to track both Miles and Anna, planted listening devices in their favorite meeting spots, gained access to their private communications through entirely legal channels. Amazing what a worried spouse can accomplish with a good lawyer and evidence of suspected financial fraud. The real breakthrough had come when I discovered Anna's true identity. Anna Kirkland wasn't just a con artist. She was a known associate of several healthcare fraud rings. That discovery had led to a secret meeting in a hospital parking garage worthy of a spy novel. "I can offer you immunity," I told her 4 months ago. "Full witness protection, new identity, clean slate. All you have to do is help me prove what Miles is doing." Anna had been smarter than Miles gave her credit for. She'd seen the writing on the wall and agreed to play her part, continuing her role as the infatuated mistress while documenting every illegal transaction Miles asked her to handle. Tonight's dinner hadn't been Miles's idea at all. I'd orchestrated everything, using Anna to suggest the restaurant, the timing, even the cruel way he'd chosen to end our marriage. Miles's ego had made him believe it was all his own plan. Each step had been calculated, each reaction anticipated. I'd known Miles would choose to humiliate me publicly. His narcissism wouldn't allow for anything less dramatic. I'd known Anna would wear my grandmother's bracelet. I'd planted it in Miles's desk myself, knowing he'd give it to her as a trophy. As I drove home now, I thought about the evidence folders being delivered to hospital board members' homes, the international wire transfers being flagged and frozen, the arrest warrants being executed at multiple locations. In a few hours, the empire Miles had built on stolen research funds would crumble. My phone buzzed with an incoming text from Kelly. "All targets in custody, evidence secured." Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. I pulled into our driveway, the same one Miles and I had shared for 15 years, and smiled at the irony. While he'd been planning tonight's grand gesture of humiliation, I'd been setting up the final pieces of my elaborate trap right under his nose in our own home. Another text from Kelly lit up my phone. "Package 2 delivered. Board members responding." Everything was unfolding with clockwork precision. The evidence I'd gathered hadn't just been sent to the FBI. I'd made sure every hospital board member received personalized packages containing proof of how Miles's actions had specifically damaged their interests. Dr. Harrison would be particularly interested in how Miles had manipulated the clinical trial data. Dr. Winters would be furious about the falsified patient outcomes that had been published under joint authorship. Each package was tailored to hit where it would hurt most, ensuring the board would turn on Miles completely. I entered our house, soon to be just mine, and walked straight to Miles's study. The wall safe behind his framed medical license, a fake, another secret I'd uncovered, held more than just documents. I spun the dial with practiced ease. He never knew I'd learned the combination months ago by simply watching him open it one night while he thought I was asleep. Inside lay the final pieces of evidence, original documents proving he had falsified, research data, endangering patients while building his reputation as a pioneering neurosurgeon. I'd found them 4 weeks ago but left them in place, knowing tonight would be the perfect time for their discovery. The FBI would be here within the hour with a search warrant. They'd find exactly what they were looking for, exactly where I'd ensured it would be. The safe, Miles's laptop with its hidden partition, the backup drive disguised as a medical reference book. All would tell the same damning story. I moved to our bedroom, the room we'd shared until Miles started spending more nights at his research apartment, and opened my jewelry box. The empty spot where my grandmother's bracelet had been seemed to mock Miles's arrogance. He'd never suspected that I'd noticed it missing, never imagined I would recognize it on Anna's wrist tonight. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Anna. Secondary files sent to prosecutors, en route to Safe House. She had played her part perfectly, documenting every illegal transaction Miles had trusted her with. Her relationship with him had been the perfect cover for gathering evidence, and her immunity deal would ensure she stayed far away from any fallout. The most critical piece of my investigation fell into place 4 months before our anniversary dinner, on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in the hospital parking garage. I'd timed my arrival precisely between shifts, when the concrete structure would be at its emptiest, minimizing the chance of witnesses. Level 3, Section D, as far from security cameras as possible. I'd mapped out the surveillance blind spots during a volunteer shift at the hospital fundraiser weeks earlier, making mental notes while distributing name badges and champagne. My windshield wipers beat a steady rhythm as I watched a silver Audi pull into the space opposite mine. Exactly. On time. Punctuality, at least, was a quality we shared. The car's headlights flashed once, our prearranged signal, before going dark. I stepped out of my car, umbrella unfurled against the persistent drizzle, and walked toward the Audi. The woman who emerged was exactly as I'd expected, carefully polished, expensively dressed, and considerably younger than me. Seeing her up close without the distortion of surveillance photos or glimpsed reflections was jarring. Not because she was beautiful, though conventionally she was, but because I recognized something in her calculated poise that reminded me of myself 15 years ago. "I wasn't sure you'd come," I said, maintaining a professional distance. Shelley Klein, if that was even her real name, assessed me with eyes far shrewder than I'd anticipated. "Curiosity is a powerful motivator, Mrs. Campbell. Your message was intriguingly vague." I'd left a simple note in her desk drawer at the hospital development office. "I know about the bracelet. And much more. Parking garage, level 3D, Tuesday, 4 p.m. Come alone if you want options." "Let's speak in my car," I suggested, gesturing to my sedan. "It's clean." The implication that hers might be monitored wasn't lost on her. A flicker of unease crossed her features before she nodded, following me to the passenger side. Her perfume, the same scent I'd detected on Miles's collar, filled the confined space as she settled into the seat. I handed her a sealed manila envelope. "Before we talk, I'd like you to review these documents." She opened it with manicured fingers that bore no rings. A deliberate choice, I suspected, for someone in her line of work. Inside were surveillance photos of her with 3 different men over the past 5 years, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, and a detailed timeline of identity changes. "Anna Kirkland," I said as she stared at the evidence of her past. Before that, Melissa Porter, and originally Lisa Dempsey from Henderson, Nevada. "You've been busy." The practiced charm drained from her face, replaced by a calculating wariness I found oddly reassuring. This wasn't an infatuated young woman caught in Miles's orbit. This was a professional playing her own game. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter," I interrupted smoothly. "What matters is that your pattern is established. You identify medical professionals with access to research funds, develop relationships, help them divert money, and then disappear with your share before the fraud is discovered. She closed the folder, her composure returning with remarkable speed. If you're recording this conversation, I'm not, I assured her. That would be premature. Right now, I'm simply presenting options. Options, she repeated, testing the word. Such as? I laid out 3 more documents on the dashboard between us. Option 1. I take everything I've found on you and Miles directly to the FBI. Given your history, I doubt they'd offer you the same deal as your previous collaborators. I tapped the second document. Option 2. You disappear now, before Miles realizes you're planning to betray him like the others. You'd avoid prosecution but leave empty-handed. Her eyes narrowed. And option 3? I slid the third document toward her, a non-disclosure agreement and immunity arrangement I'd drafted using language from my prosecutorial days. It wouldn't hold up in court, but she wouldn't know that. You work with me. Continue your board relationship with Miles. Document everything. Record conversations about the financial arrangements. Provide me with access to accounts and records I can't reach. When the time is right, you'll receive immunity for your testimony, a new identity, and enough legitimate funds to start over somewhere else. Why would you offer me that? She asked, suspicion evident in her voice. You could just turn us both in. Because I want more than just Miles's arrest. I want the complete dismantling of everything he's built on lies. For that, I need someone on the inside. She studied me with newfound respect. You're not what I expected. Neither are you, I acknowledged. Miles described you as a naive young fundraiser dazzled by his brilliance. But we both know you identified him as a target long before he thought he was pursuing you. A slight smile played at the corner of her mouth. The great Dr. Campbell does have certain predictable vulnerabilities. Ego being the primary one, I agreed. She picked up the third document, scanning its contents carefully. This immunity arrangement, it's comprehensive. Complete protection, provided you cooperate fully and your testimony leads to Miles's conviction. And a fresh start? New identity? Clean record? I nodded. Arranged through my former colleagues at the FBI. She was silent for a long moment, weighing her options with the calculation of someone accustomed to risk assessment. When she finally spoke, her voice had shed its affected polish, revealing the pragmatic survivor beneath. I was planning to disappear next month anyway. The accounts are almost at the target amount. She looked at me directly. He's been moving research money for over a year. Millions, not thousands. And the data falsification? It's worse than you probably realize. I suspected as much. Why wait? She asked. If you have enough to approach me, you have enough to turn him in. Because I want him to experience exactly what he's planned for me. Public humiliation, complete loss. And for that, timing is everything. Understanding dawned in her eyes. The anniversary dinner. He's been planning it for weeks. I kept my expression neutral. Tell me about these plans. As Anna, I now thought of her by her real name, detailed Miles's intended cruelty, I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. The pieces were aligning perfectly. She would be my silent partner in this final act, unknowingly playing a role, completely different from the one Miles had scripted for her. I'll need regular reports, I said as our meeting concluded, and recordings when possible. How do I contact you safely? I handed her a prepaid phone. Memorize the only number programmed in it. Text only, coded references. She tucked it into her purse, then paused before opening the car door. He really has no idea who he's dealing with, does he? No, I replied simply. He doesn't. As I watched her walk back to her Audi, the emerald bracelet glinting on her wrist, I realized we had formed an unlikely alliance. 2 women underestimated by the same man, both playing roles that concealed our true capabilities. The perfect partnership for the perfect revenge. I changed out of my midnight blue dress, carefully hanging it up. This dress had been more than just an outfit. It had been a costume for the most important performance of my life. Every detail of tonight had been choreographed. The champagne I'd ordered, Miles's favorite, making him lower his guard. The table location, in full view of security cameras. Even the timing of the FBI agent's arrival. The foundation for this evening had been laid months ago. Each conference Miles attended had given me time to piece together his criminal network. Every late night he spent with Anna had allowed me to access his office, copy files, plant recording devices. His own arrogance had made him careless, leaving digital breadcrumbs that any skilled investigator could follow. I poured myself a glass of wine, not the overpriced Krug from dinner, but a simple Pinot Noir I actually enjoyed, and settled into my home office. My laptop showed multiple email notifications, board members responding to the evidence, financial alerts as accounts were frozen, news organizations picking up the first hints of the scandal. The perfect setup wasn't just about gathering evidence or timing its release. It was about understanding people, their weaknesses, their motivations, their breaking points. Miles had always underestimated me, seeing only what he wanted to see. The supportive wife who'd given up a promising career in law enforcement for him. He never realized that I'd never stopped being an investigator. I'd just found a more personal case to solve. My phone lit up with a video call from Kelly. The timing was perfect, exactly 90 minutes after I'd left Le Chateau Blanc. "It's done," she said, her face illuminated by police lights flashing in the background. "Miles Campbell is in custody. You should see his face when we found the hidden research files in his hospital office." I took another sip of wine, savoring the moment. "And Anna?" "Safely in witness protection. She's already given her official statement about Miles's involvement in the research fraud. The evidence she provided matches perfectly with your documentation, Anir." My laptop screen, news alerts were already starting to pop up. "Prestigious neurosurgeon arrested," screamed one headline. "Massive research fraud uncovered at Riverside Memorial," declared another. The medical news channels would be running this story nonstop by morning. I switched to the security feed I'd installed in Miles's hospital office months ago. FBI agents were methodically going through every drawer, every file, finding each piece of evidence exactly where I'd ensured it would be. The look of defeat on Miles's face as they'd led him out in handcuffs was something I'd remember forever. "The board members?" I asked Kelly. "All 12 of them have pledged full cooperation with the investigation." Dr. Harrison was particularly vocal about pressing charges after seeing those falsified clinical trial reports. Everything was falling into place, exactly as planned. The execution of this plan had been flawless, each component triggering the next like a line of perfectly arranged dominoes. Miles's attempt to humiliate me at our anniversary dinner had become the catalyst for his own destruction. My security system alerted me to movement at the front door. Right on schedule, the local police arriving with a search warrant for our home. I buzzed them in, playing the part of the shocked and cooperative wife perfectly. "Mrs. Campbell," the lead detective said gently, "we have a warrant to search the premises. We understand this must come as a shock." I let my voice tremble slightly. "Of course, officer. Please do whatever you need to do. I just can't believe all those late nights he said he was working." They moved through the house efficiently, finding the damning evidence in Miles's study exactly where it needed to be: the false bottom in his desk drawer, the encrypted files on his personal laptop, the offshore account documents hidden in his rare medical books collection. Each discovery adding another nail to the coffin of his defense. My phone buzzed again, Anna's burner phone this time. "Package delivered to DA's office. All accounts transferred as planned. I'm going dark now. Thank you for the second chance." Deleted the message immediately. Anna had been the perfect accomplice, playing her role as the homewrecker while actually helping to gather the evidence that would bring Miles down. Her own criminal past had made her the ideal candidate for turning state's evidence. The police were now in Miles's home office, photographing everything. I watched as they discovered the fake medical license, another piece of evidence that would lead to additional charges of credential fraud. Miles's perfect world was unraveling, thread by thread, and he was powerless to stop it. "Mrs. Campbell," the detective called out, "we found something interesting in your husband's safe. Did you know about these documents?" I walked over, feigning confusion. I never knew the combination. Miles was very private about his business matters." The detective held up the falsified research papers showing Miles's theft of other doctors' work. My anonymous tip about those would hit the DA's desk tomorrow morning, adding another layer to the prosecution's case. "No," I whispered, letting my eyes fill with tears. I had no idea. All this time. As the officers continued their search, I retreated to the kitchen, ostensibly to make coffee for everyone. In reality, I needed a moment to appreciate how perfectly everything had aligned. The execution of my plan had been flawless. From the public humiliation Miles had orchestrated unwittingly against himself to the precise timing of law enforcement's involvement. Dawn broke over the city as the last police car pulled away from our driveway. The morning news was already running the story on every channel. Renowned neurosurgeon arrested in massive fraud scheme. The medical networks were having a field day, their analyses highlighting the potential impact on patients who had received treatment based on Miles's falsified research. I sat in my kitchen, watching the chaos unfold on multiple screens. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since sunrise. Reporters, hospital board members, old colleagues, all wanting to know how I was handling the shocking revelation of my husband's crimes. Little did they know, the first call I took was from Joel. Williams, Miles's mentor, despite his declining health, his voice was sharp with anger and disappointment. "I warned him about you," the old doctor said without preamble. "Told him never to trust a woman with your background. But I never thought, never imagined he'd betray medicine like this." "I'm so sorry, Joel," I replied, letting genuine sympathy color my voice. Miles's mentor had always been kind to me, even while warning his protege against our marriage. "If there's anything I can do..." "You've done enough," he said quietly. "The hospital board is meeting in an hour. We need an interim chief of neurosurgery to handle this crisis." I smiled into my coffee cup. Right on schedule. The aftermath was spreading like ripples in a pond. Miles's closest allies at Riverside Memorial were being suspended pending investigation. The hospital's reputation had taken a massive hit overnight, with patients calling to cancel procedures and research partners freezing collaborative projects. My laptop pinged with an email from Anna's lawyer. Her official statement had been filed with the DA's office. She detailed every transaction, every falsified research result, every instance of medical fraud she'd witnessed. Her testimony would be devastating to Miles's defense. The doorbell rang, Kelly arriving with official papers. "The DA wants to take your statement," she said, settling into my kitchen with her own coffee. "They're building a rock-solid case. Miles hasn't said a word since his arrest, but with the evidence we have, he doesn't need to." I nodded, reviewing. The preliminary charges: fraud, embezzlement, research falsification, patient endangerment, tax evasion, credential misrepresentation. Each charge backed by meticulous documentation, each piece of evidence properly obtained and cataloged. "His lawyers?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Dropped him this morning. Apparently they found out about the falsified credentials and altered patient outcome data. They don't want any part of this." The morning papers arrived, and I spread them across my kitchen island. Each headline was more damning than the last. Medical journalists were already calling it the scandal of the decade. Expert commentators were predicting prison sentences measured in decades, not years. My phone buzzed again, a text from Miles's sister Miriam. I always knew he'd self-destruct eventually. Are you okay? I left it unanswered. Miriam had been another unwitting player in this game, her genuine concern for my well-being helping to mask my investigation over the past months. The aftermath wasn't just professional. Miles's social circle was disintegrating. Hospital board memberships revoked, medical society positions resigned, the carefully cultivated image he'd built over decades crumbling in a matter of hours. The press will want a statement, Kelly reminded me gently. They'll get one, I assured her. The devoted wife, shocked and devastated by her husband's betrayal, standing ready to cooperate fully with authorities. My performance at Le Chateau Blanc had been just the beginning. Now came the harder part, maintaining the facade of the wronged wife, playing my role in the public aftermath of Miles's downfall. A final text came through from an unknown number. Anna, one last time. Forever grateful. Good luck. Then her number went dark as she disappeared into her new life under witness protection. I looked around my kitchen at the empire of evidence I'd built to destroy the man who'd thought he could discard me. The aftermath was still unfolding, but the hardest part was done. Miles would never see it coming until it was too late. 1 month later, I sat in the gallery of the federal courthouse, watching as Miles was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, a far cry from his tailored surgical scrubs. He looked older, defeated, his carefully maintained appearance now showing signs of strain. He didn't look at me, but I made sure he could feel my presence. The hearing was brief but decisive. Miles had finally agreed to a plea deal, facing 25 years in federal prison and forfeiture of all assets gained through illegal means. His lawyers had advised him it was the best offer he'd get given the mountain of evidence against him. Your Honor, the prosecutor announced, we have reached an agreement with the defendant. In exchange for his full cooperation in ongoing investigations into research fraud at multiple institutions, Dr. Campbell will plead guilty to all charges. I watched Miles's shoulders slump as the judge reviewed the terms. His father sat 2 rows behind him, looking more devastated than angry now. The mighty Campbell family name, built over generations of respected physicians, had been destroyed in a matter of weeks. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed, hungry for a statement from the devoted wife who'd been blindsided by her husband's crimes. I played my part perfectly. I'm still processing everything, I told them, letting my voice catch slightly. The Miles I knew, or thought I knew, was dedicated to his patients above all else. I just hope the truth brings some closure to everyone affected by his actions. Later that evening, I sat in what was now officially my house. The plea deal had included Miles forfeiting all claims to our joint assets and opened a special bottle of wine I'd been saving. Not the overpriced Krug Miles had preferred, but a simple Oregon Pinot Noir I'd discovered on our first date, before he tried to remake me into his perfect doctor's wife. My phone lit up with a message from Joel Williams. The board has reviewed your proposal. We'd like to meet tomorrow to discuss your role in rebuilding the department's research integrity. Everything had come full circle. Miles had once pushed me away from medical oversight. Now I would help lead the effort to resurrect Riverside, Memorial's reputation from the ashes of his crimes. His mentor, who had once warned him about my background in financial crime investigation, now saw it as the department's salvation. Anna was thriving in her new life, her immunity deal securing, her freedom and a fresh start. The last update from her handler indicated she'd enrolled in community college, pursuing a legitimate healthcare administration degree far from her past cons. Sometimes the best revenge included allowing others a chance at redemption. I walked through the house, finally free to make the changes I'd always wanted. Miles's pretentious medical art collection, mostly overpriced prints he'd used to impress colleagues, would be replaced with pieces I actually loved. His study, that fortress of secrets and lies, would become my home office. The media had already dubbed it the Campbell scandal, but they'd missed the real story. They focused on the research fraud, the embezzlement, the dramatic arrest. None of them suspected that the entire thing had been orchestrated by the quiet wife they depicted as another victim of Miles's deceptions. I opened my laptop one last time that evening, reviewing the final piece of my resolution. My official statement accepting the position of compliance director at Riverside Memorial's research division was ready to be released tomorrow. The board had been eager to demonstrate their commitment to transparency and reform. Who better to prevent future fraud than the woman who had exposed the last one? Miles's last words to me had been at Le Chateau Blanc, "Meet my future." He never realized that I was the one who'd be determining that future. His future in a federal prison, the future of his reputation, now in tatters, the future of the hospital, department he'd built through fraud, now in my hands. The resolution wasn't just about justice or revenge, it was about transformation. Miles had tried to diminish me, to make me smaller. Instead, he'd given me the perfect opportunity to reveal my true self. As I got ready for bed that night, I caught my reflection in the mirror. The woman looking back wasn't the same one who'd endured that humiliating anniversary dinner. She was stronger, sharper, more complete. Miles had wanted to write my ending, but instead, he'd only set up my beginning. Some people say revenge is a dish best served cold. I disagree. The best revenge is served at precisely the right temperature, with perfect timing and garnished with absolute victory. 3 months after Miles's guilty plea, I stood at the podium in Riverside Memorial's Grand Lecture Hall, addressing the hospital's newly assembled Ethics and Compliance Committee. The room was filled with board members, department chairs, and research staff, many of the same people who had once viewed me simply as Dr. Campbell's wife. The foundation of medical research isn't just methodology, I told them. It's integrity. Without that, everything else crumbles. From my position at the front of the room, I could see the subtle shifts in how they regarded me now. No longer the quiet spouse who attended hospital galas on Miles's arm, but a formidable professional, in my own right. The irony wasn't lost on me. Miles had spent years gradually pushing me into the background, yet his downfall had thrust me into the spotlight. After my presentation, Joel Williams approached, leaning heavily on his cane. Age had weakened his body but not his mind. "You know," he said quietly, "I warned Miles about you for all the wrong reasons. I thought your background in financial crime investigation would make you too scrupulous, too rigorous for his comfort. I never imagined he'd give you cause to turn those skills against him." I smiled. "You weren't entirely wrong, Joel. Just about. Which of us needed to be worried? The hospital's recovery was proceeding methodically under my guidance. We'd established new oversight protocols, implemented triple verification for research data, and created anonymous reporting systems for concerns. Miles's former department was being rebuilt from the ground up, without the shortcuts and fabrications that had characterized his leadership. My phone buzzed with a notification from the U.S. Attorney's Office. Miles's cooperation had led to investigations at 3 other research hospitals, uncovering similar schemes. The fraudulent research network was being dismantled piece by piece, each revelation tracing back to evidence I'd initially gathered. That evening, I hosted a small dinner party, the first social event in what was now truly my home. Kelly was there, along with several colleagues from my newly established professional circle. The conversation flowed easily, touching on everything from healthcare compliance to art, with no mention of Miles or the scandal that had dominated headlines for months. As I served dessert, Kelly pulled me aside. "You know what impresses me most?" she asked quietly. "Not the takedown, though that was masterful, but what you're building in its aftermath." I considered her words as I looked around at my guests, my redesigned home, my new professional path. The revenge had been necessary and satisfying, but it wasn't the end of the story. It was merely the clearing of ground for something new to grow. Later that week, I visited Anna at her new location. a small college town where she was building her legitimate life. Witness protection had given her a new identity, but our arrangement had given her something more valuable, a second chance. "I never thanked you properly," she said as we walked through the campus where she was now studying healthcare administration. "You could have destroyed me along with him." "We all deserve the opportunity to redefine ourselves," I replied. "Some just need a stronger push than others." I studied her as we talked. The designer clothes and calculated mannerisms were gone, replaced by a more authentic presence. The woman who had once been willing to help destroy my life was finding her own path forward. There was a certain symmetry to it that appealed to my sense of order. Back at Riverside Memorial, I participated in a board meeting reviewing the hospital's recovery strategy. The financial losses had been substantial. Donors had pulled back, patients had sought care elsewhere, and legal settlements were still being negotiated. Yet there was a surprising silver lining. The transparency of our response was gradually rebuilding trust. "We've received accreditation for our new research integrity protocols," the chief medical officer reported. "They're actually asking permission to use our framework as a model for other institutions." I noted the irony. The very hospital that had harbored one of medicine's most significant frauds was now positioned to lead reform across the field. Sometimes transformation required complete destruction first. After the meeting, I walked through the research wing that once bore Miles's name. The signage had been changed, the decor simplified, but the most significant difference was in the atmosphere. Junior researchers spoke up at meetings now. Questions were encouraged rather than suppressed. Data anomalies were investigated, not buried. Dr. Winters, a young researcher, called, using my maiden name, which I'd reclaimed. "Would you mind reviewing our consent protocol? We've incorporated your suggestions about transparency." I took the offered document, noting how different this interaction was from a year ago, when I'd been introduced merely as Miles's wife during my rare visits to his department. That evening, as I worked in my home office, formerly Miles's domain, now transformed with light colors and art that spoke to me, I received an email from Joel Williams. The subject line read simply, "Your future." The message contained the formal nomination for me to join the National Medical Ethics Board, a position that would allow me to influence policy at the highest levels. It was an acknowledgement not just of my role in exposing Miles's fraud, but of the constructive work I'd done in its aftermath. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the garden I'd redesigned after Miles's arrest. The structured English layout he'd preferred had been replaced with a more natural landscape. Wildflowers among the cultivated beds, stone paths that curved rather than bisected. Like my life, it had been transformed rather than merely repaired. Sow. Phone rang, Kelly calling with an update. "Miles is being transferred to the medical facility at the federal prison," she informed me. "Apparently, he's having trouble adjusting to confinement." I acknowledged the information without emotion. Miles's ongoing story was no longer central to mine. It was merely a footnote now. "Also," Kelly continued, "Anna's handler reports she's made the dean's list this semester. Seems she's applying herself legitimately for once." This news brought a slight smile. Redemption came in many forms. Before going to bed, I opened my journal, a habit I'd maintained throughout this journey. My entry was brief but significant. 1. Year ago today, Miles brought his future to our anniversary dinner. He never understood that the future isn't something you announce. It's something you build, choice by choice, day by day. Tonight, I stand firmly in mine. 6 months later, I stood before the National Medical Ethics Board in Washington, D.C., delivering my first address as its newest member. The Grand Chamber was filled with the country's leading medical authorities, policymakers, and hospital administrators. My presentation on integrity safeguards in research methodology drew directly from the lessons of Miles's case, though I never mentioned him by name. The most dangerous breaches don't begin with grand deceptions, I explained. To the attentive audience, they start with small compromises that grow when left unchecked. The irony wasn't lost on me that Miles's betrayal, both personal and professional, had positioned me to influence medical research integrity on a national scale. His attempt to discard me as irrelevant had instead elevated me to a position he had coveted but never achieved. After my presentation, the Surgeon General approached, extending his hand. Dr. Winters, your framework for early detection of research manipulation is exactly what we've needed. Would you consider heading a task force to implement these protocols nationally? I accepted with genuine enthusiasm. The work had become more than a response to betrayal. It had evolved into a mission with purpose beyond my personal story. That evening, I dined with Joel Williams, who had flown in specifically to witness my address. Despite his advancing age, his mind remained razor-sharp. I underestimated you from the beginning, he admitted over dinner. First as Miles's wife, then as a compliance officer. But watching you today, he shook his head in admiration. You've turned a catastrophic fraud into a catalyst for systemic reform. Sometimes destruction creates space for something better to emerge, I replied. Later that night in my hotel room, I received an unexpected call from the warden at the federal medical facility where Miles was serving his sentence. Dr. Winters, I apologize for contacting you so late. Dr. Campbell has experienced a medical episode. He's stabilized now, but he's been asking to speak with you. You're still listed as his emergency contact. I sat with this information, weighing my response. Has he specified what he wants to discuss? No, ma'am. Just that it's important and concerns information not yet disclosed. I agreed to a brief video call the following morning, curiosity overcoming my reluctance to engage. When Miles' face appeared on the screen, I was struck by how dramatically he had aged. The confident surgeon who had once commanded rooms was gone, replaced by a hollow-eyed man in standard-issue clothing. May, he began, his voice lacking its former authority. Thank you for taking my call. I remained silent, waiting. There's something you should know, he continued. Something that wasn't in any of the files you found. He proceeded to reveal information about a pharmaceutical study he had manipulated 5 years earlier. Research that had led to the approval of a neurological medication now prescribed to thousands of patients. The side effects were there in the original data, he confessed. I buried them to get the approval through. The manufacturer's payments came through channels you didn't trace. I maintained my composure despite the gravity of this revelation. Why tell me this now, Miles? Because patients are at risk, he said simply. And because I saw your address to the ethics board this morning. They televised it here. A pause. You've become everything I pretended to be. After ending the call, I immediately contacted Kelly, setting in motion an investigation into this new information. By that evening, we had confirmation. Miles's confession was accurate. Thousands of patients were taking a medication with undisclosed risks of seizures and cognitive decline. 2 days later, I stood beside the FDA commissioner as he announced an immediate review of the drug, crediting new information from ongoing fraud investigations. My role in bringing this to light positioned me as a patient safety advocate in addition to my ethics work. The media coverage was extensive. Medical journals published special issues on research integrity, often citing my methodologies as models for detection and prevention. I received invitations to speak at medical schools nationwide, addressing the next generation of physicians about the fundamental importance of ethical research. Through it all, I never publicly connected these professional achievements to my personal story. The revenge that had initially motivated me had evolved into something more meaningful, a genuine commitment to protecting patients and preserving the integrity of medical science. 8 months after Miles's additional confession, I returned to Riverside Memorial to deliver the keynote address at their newly established annual ethics symposium. The irony of speaking in the very auditorium where Miles had once presented his fraudulent research findings wasn't lost on me. The hospital had undergone its own transformation. Under new leadership and with rigorous oversight protocols, many, developed under my guidance, Riverside was rebuilding its reputation. Research publications now underwent triple-blind verification. Financial transactions were transparent and regularly audited. Most importantly, a culture of questioning was replacing the previous deference to authority. After my address, a young researcher approached me with obvious nervousness. "Dr. Winters, your work is the reason I chose research integrity as my focus. Would you consider mentoring me?" I recognized something in her earnest determination, perhaps a reflection of my younger self before Miles had redirected my career path. "I'd be happy to," I replied, scheduling a time to discuss her work. That evening, I dined with Kelly and several colleagues who had become friends during this journey. The conversation turned to the announcement that Miles had been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's disease, a cruel twist for a neurosurgeon. "Have you had any further communication with him?" someone asked carefully. "No," I answered truthfully. "Our last interaction was about the medication safety issue. What I didn't share was the letter I'd received from him the previous week, a rambling apology that seemed designed more to ease his conscience than to make genuine amends. I had read it once, then filed it away, neither responding nor discarding it. Some chapters needed closure, but that didn't necessitate reconciliation. Later, that night, I found myself reflecting on the journey of the past 2 years. What had begun as a calculated response to betrayal had evolved into something I hadn't anticipated. A second career more impactful than my first, a new community of colleagues who valued my expertise, and a sense of purpose that transcended the personal injury that had initiated it. In my hotel room, I opened my laptop to finish a draft of my forthcoming book, Research Integrity: Safeguarding Medicine's Future. The publisher had approached me after my ethics board appointment, seeing an opportunity to address a critical issue in medical education. The advance copy on my nightstand bore my name, Dr. May Winters, with no reference to my former identity as Mrs. Campbell. As I made final edits to the manuscript, an email arrived from Anna's handler with a photo attachment. She was graduating with honors, her genuine smile a stark contrast to the calculated expressions I'd witnessed at our anniversary dinner 2 years earlier. Her redemption story was unfolding parallel to my own reinvention. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the lights of the city where my professional life had begun decades ago. Before Miles, before the betrayal, before the revenge that had unexpectedly launched a new chapter. The woman reflected in the window glass was neither the young prosecutor I had been, nor the poised wife Miles had cultivated. This woman was entirely of my own making. The key to dismantling Miles's empire lay in documents, the financial records, research data, and correspondence that formed the skeleton of his fraudulent work. For 3 months, I transformed our guest bedroom into a war room when Miles was away, meticulously tracking every dollar, every falsified result, every connection, in his elaborate scheme. My first breakthrough came through the household banking statements. Miles had grown careless, having directed most financial documents to his office, but he'd forgotten the quarterly investment summary that still arrived at our home. A single line item caught my attention: a transfer to MCC Research Holdings, an entity I'd never heard of despite supposedly handling our joint investments for years. Traced MCC Research Holdings to a shell company in the Cayman Islands, which itself connected to 3 other entities with variations of the same initials: Miles Campbell Consulting, Miles Campbell Consolidated, Medical Capital Corporation. All empty vessels designed to receive and redistribute research funding with minimal oversight. The account statements from these entities painted a damning picture. Research grants from the National Institutes of Health, private foundations, and hospital endowments flowed into legitimate Riverside Memorial accounts. only to be siphoned through a complex series of transfers that ultimately led to Miles's personal accounts or vanished into property investments. The most substantial funds, over $4.2 million, came from the Alzheimer's Research Foundation, money intended for a longitudinal study of early-onset dementia. The grant documentation promised breakthrough interventions, potentially life-changing treatments for thousands of patients. The reality, buried in spreadsheets and account transfers, was that less than 30% of those funds ever reached actual research activities. I created a detailed flowchart on my laptop, color-coding each transaction stream: red for diverted research funds, blue for hospital operational money, green for private donations. The pattern became undeniable, a systematic looting of resources meant to help vulnerable patients. But financial fraud, however extensive, wasn't enough. The investigation needed to address the human cost of Miles's crimes. The research data proved more challenging to access. Hospital systems were protected behind multiple security layers, and Miles kept his study results on secure servers. However, his publication history offered a starting point. Medical journals required data transparency. Researchers needed to provide statistical information supporting their conclusions. I downloaded every paper Miles had published in the past 5 years, focusing on methodologies and results sections. Comparing the data sets across studies revealed statistical impossibilities, patient outcomes too consistent, error margins too narrow, success rates that defied medical probability. In one Parkinson's treatment study, Miles reported a 72% improvement rate among test subjects, more than double what competing research had achieved. The data tables showed perfectly distributed response patterns, something virtually impossible in genuine clinical trials where human variability always creates statistical noise. More damning was his Alzheimer's research. The baseline cognitive assessments for his patient cohort were suspiciously uniform, suggesting either fabricated participants or manipulated initial measurements to make subsequent improvements appear more dramatic. I cross-referenced patient identification numbers with hospital records I could access through my volunteer work, discovering that several supposed study participants had never been diagnosed with the conditions Miles claimed to be treating. Others had died or moved away before his miraculous follow-up results were supposedly collected. The fraud extended beyond money. Miles was fabricating medical breakthroughs, giving false hope to patients and families desperate for treatments. Research centers worldwide were attempting to replicate his protocols, wasting valuable resources chasing phantoms born in Miles's imagination rather than his laboratory. The most heartbreaking evidence came in the form of letters from patients' families, thanking Miles for giving them hope through his research. These letters, which he kept in a folder marked testimonials in his office, represented real people counting on treatments that didn't exist. I photographed each one, adding them to my growing file of evidence, not just of fraud, but of profound ethical betrayal. As the financial connections became clearer, I created secure digital backups of everything, storing them on encrypted drives, hidden throughout the house and in a safe deposit box opened under my maiden name. Miles's technical knowledge was limited to medical systems. He wouldn't think to look for financial forensics hidden in plain sight, a hollowed-out medical ethics textbook on our bookshelf, a false bottom in my jewelry box, cloud storage under an email account named for my childhood pet. The most crucial documents, however, came from an unexpected source. Anna had access to Miles's private office at the hospital, a privilege granted to his research assistant that allowed her to photograph internal memos, board communications, and grant applications showing deliberate misrepresentation of research, protocols, and results. Each night, after Miles fell asleep, I would retrieve Anna's latest information drop from a secure email account, adding new pieces to the puzzle. The picture forming was far worse than even I had initially suspected. Miles hadn't just embezzled money and falsified data. He had deliberately structured his department to shield himself from oversight, while creating subordinates who unwittingly participated in his schemes. Research fellows signed off on papers without access to raw data. Lab technicians processed samples according to protocols designed to produce desired outcomes. Junior faculty members eager for publication credits added their names to studies they hadn't fully reviewed. The system Miles created wasn't just corrupt, it was corrupting, pulling others into his fraud through compartmentalization and hierarchy. Many of his colleagues weren't complicit but compromised, their scientific integrity undermined by a structure designed to prevent anyone from seeing the complete picture. By the time I had compiled all the evidence, the documentation filled 3 secure cloud folders and a physical evidence binder hidden in a waterproof container in our garden shed. Each allegation was supported by multiple sources: bank records, correspondence, data analysis, witness statements. The case against Miles wasn't just strong, it was overwhelming. I presented selected portions to Kelly from the FBI, carefully, controlling information flow to ensure the investigation proceeded on my timeline, not theirs. The federal agents were eager to move immediately, but I convinced them that patience would yield a more complete case. "He's been careful for years," I told Kelly over encrypted video calls. "Rush this and he'll find a way to shift blame to subordinates or destroy evidence we haven't secured yet." What I didn't tell her was that I needed more than Miles's arrest. I needed his public downfall, timed precisely to mirror the humiliation he had planned for me. The paper trail I had assembled wasn't just evidence for prosecution, it was the script for his undoing. 2 years to the day after that fateful anniversary, dinner at Le Chateau Blanc, I returned to the restaurant. The maitre d', the same one who had handed me the envelope that night, recognized me immediately. "Dr. Winters," he greeted me with a respectful nod. "Your usual table?" I smiled at the irony of having a usual table at a place I'd visited only once before, a place that had marked the end of one life and the beginning of another. "Yes, thank you." The table was positioned exactly as it had been that night, offering a clear view of the entrance and perfectly situated under the security cameras that had captured Miles's downfall. This time, however, I was dining alone by choice. As I sipped a glass of the Pinot Noir I genuinely enjoyed, I opened a small leather portfolio containing the day's news. The headline read, "FDA establishes Winters protocol for research validation." The article detailed how my methodology for detecting research fraud was being implemented nationwide, becoming the gold standard for medical journals and pharmaceutical approvals. My phone buzzed with messages of congratulation from colleagues on the ethics board, from Joel Williams, from researchers whose careers I'd mentored. None of them connected this professional triumph to its origins in personal betrayal. That part of the story remained known only to a handful of people. The server approached with a small package. "This was left for you earlier today, Dr. Winters," the sigh. Package contained a velvet box with my grandmother's emerald bracelet and a note from Anna. "This belongs with its rightful owner. Thank you for the chance at a real future." I fastened the bracelet around my wrist, completing a circle that had begun with its theft. The emeralds caught the light just as they had on Shelley's, Anna's, wrist that night. But now they represented something different. The recovery of what was mine, both literally and figuratively. The following morning, I delivered the keynote address at the International Conference on Research Ethics in Boston. My speech, Building Safeguards into Scientific Progress, drew on the case studies I'd assembled over the past 2 years, including, without naming him, the systematic fraud Miles had perpetrated. The most dangerous threat to medical progress isn't ignorance, I told the assembled physicians and researchers. It's deliberate deception motivated by ego and greed, cloaked in the respectability of prestigious institutions. After the conference, I met with publishers interested in developing my protocols into a textbook for medical education. What had begun as a methodology born of my investigation into Miles's crimes was evolving into a legacy that would outlast both his career and mine. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Miriam, Miles's sister. "I'm at Riverside Memorial with Miles," she said without preamble. "His condition has deteriorated significantly. He's asking to see you." I hesitated, weighing the request. "Did he say why?" "No, but—" Miriam paused. "May? He doesn't have much time left. The Parkinson's has accelerated, and there are complications." The irony was stark. A neurosurgeon being claimed by a neurological disease. A man who had falsified treatments now beyond treatment himself. But beneath my professional detachment, I recognized this moment for what it was. An opportunity to close the final chapter. 3 hours later, I stood outside Miles's hospital room, gathering my thoughts. Inside was the man who had once introduced another woman as my replacement, who had orchestrated my public humiliation, who had betrayed not just me but the very oath of medicine he'd sworn to uphold. Yet he was also the man I'd once loved, whose career I'd helped build, whose life had become inextricably intertwined with my own, despite all efforts to sever it. I entered the room to find Miles significantly diminished, thin, tremoring, his once commanding presence reduced to frailty. His eyes, however, retained their sharp intelligence as they met mine. "Thank you for coming," he said, his voice weak but clear. I took a seat beside his bed, maintaining a professional demeanor. "Miriam said you wanted to see me." Miles struggled to control the tremors in his hands. "I saw the announcement about the Winters protocol." A pause. "It's good work, May. Work that will save lives." "Yes," I replied simply. "The irony isn't lost on me," he continued with difficulty, "that my greatest contribution to medicine may be serving as the case study for how to prevent people like me from corrupting it." I didn't contradict him. It was, perhaps, the most honest self-assessment he had ever made. "I've had a lot of time to think," Miles said after a moment. "About that night at Le Chateau Blanc. About all of it." "And?" I prompted when he didn't. "Continue. You were always the better scientist, the more rigorous mind. I knew it even before I brought Shelley, Anna, to that dinner." His breathing became labored. "That's why I had to diminish you. Your precision made my shortcuts impossible to justify." This admission, this recognition of my value that he had once deliberately undermined, wasn't the apology I might have. Once needed, but it was something more valuable. The truth. "The medical board is reviewing my cases," he continued. "All of them, going back 15 years. They're applying your protocols." "I know," I replied. "I'm consulting on the review." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "Of course you are." We sat in silence for several minutes, the steady beep of his monitors marking time. Finally, he spoke again. "Do you remember what you said in your toast that night?" "To new beginnings." "You already knew then, didn't you?" I met his gaze directly. "I knew enough." Miles nodded slightly, accepting this. "You orchestrated everything. The evidence, the witnesses, the timing. You were always 3 steps ahead." "Someone had to be," I replied. As I prepared to leave, Miles spoke one final time. "The protocols you've developed, they'll be your legacy. A better one than anything I built on lies." I paused at the door. "Goodbye, Miles." Outside the hospital, I breathed deeply in the clear autumn air. There was a symmetry to this encounter, the closing of a circle that had begun with betrayal and ended with a recognition, however belated, of truth. The next morning brought news of Miles's passing during the night. The medical journals published brief obituaries noting his fall from prominence without dwelling on the details. In contrast, that same week featured lengthy articles about the implementation of the Winters protocol, with my work highlighted as transformative for research validation. At home that evening, I added a final chapter to my book manuscript, addressing the human factors that enable research fraud. the institutional deference to authority, the reluctance to question celebrated figures, the prioritization of prestige over accuracy. Without mentioning Miles, I drew on everything I had learned from unraveling his deceptions. My phone buzzed with a message from Kelly. "Just heard about Miles. Are you okay?" "Yes," I replied simply. It was true. The man who had attempted to orchestrate my public humiliation had instead, unwittingly, launched me into a position of greater influence than I would have otherwise achieved. The revenge I had meticulously planned had evolved into something far more significant than personal vindication. It had become a systemic reform that would protect countless patients. Later that night, I stood in my garden, looking up at the key stars. Miles had once claimed at our anniversary dinner that Shelley was his future. He never understood that the future isn't something you announce with a cruel gesture. It's something you build methodically, day by day, choice by choice. He had tried to write my ending. Instead, he had only set the stage for my beginning. Miles had always underestimated the power of the hospital's support staff, the administrators, nurses, technicians, and maintenance personnel who kept Riverside Memorial functioning, while doctors like him claimed the spotlight. This oversight became my greatest advantage as I built my case against him. Margaret Chen, the hospital's head of records management, had been with Riverside for nearly 30 years. I'd met her at numerous hospital functions, always making a point to remember details about her family that Miles routinely forgot. When I approached her about accessing certain administrative records for a surprise recognition project honoring Miles's department, she was eager to help. "Dr. Campbell has always been a bit distant with staff," Margaret confided as she helped me navigate the hospital's archival system. "Not like you, always remembering my grandson's baseball tournaments." Through Margaret, I gained access to departmental budget histories, staff assignment records, and internal reviews, documents that revealed discrepancies between reported research activities and actual resource allocation. The records showed phantom employees whose salaries went to accounts controlled by Miles, equipment purchases that never materialized in inventory counts, and space utilization reports contradicting his claims about ongoing clinical trials. Dr. Susan Wells, the hospital's chief of pathology, provided another crucial connection. Susan and I had served together on the hospital's charity gala committee for years, developing a friendship independent of my relationship with Miles. When I expressed concern about potential irregularities in some research protocols that Miles is too busy to review thoroughly, Susan offered to examine the methodologies. "Between us," she said over coffee in her office, "several of us in department leadership have questioned some of Miles's published results. The outcomes seem statistically improbable." Susan's scientific assessment confirmed my suspicions. The data in Miles's landmark papers showed patterns inconsistent with genuine research findings. Too perfect, too clean, without the natural variations inherent in human studies. She didn't know she was helping build a case against Miles. She thought she was helping his overwhelmed wife ensure research integrity. The hospital's financial office provided another valuable resource through Joel's administrative assistant, Beatrice. Now in her 60s, Beatrice had worked alongside Joel Williams for decades, witnessing his building of the neurosurgery department from its infancy. Her loyalty to Joel and her growing concern about changes under Miles's leadership made her receptive when I requested help understanding certain financial procedures. "Between us," Beatrice whispered during one of our lunch meetings, "Dr. Williams has been asking questions about funding allocations since his semi-retirement. Numbers don't add up, but nobody wants to question the great Dr. Campbell." Through Beatrice, I learned about the hospital board's blind spots, the reporting structures Miles had altered to minimize oversight, and the scheduled audits he consistently managed to delay or redirect. She provided internal memos showing Miles's systematic dismantling of accountability measures Joel had established, replacing them with processes that centralized control within his office. Even the hospital's IT department unwittingly contributed to my investigation. Phil, the night shift systems administrator who had once helped recover photos from my crashed laptop, was eager to assist when I mentioned difficulty accessing shared family files on the home network. "Happens all the time with these hospital executives," Phil said as he showed me how to navigate network security. "They bring work home, set up complicated systems, then forget to give their families proper access." His tutorial, intended to help me reach family photo albums, provided insights into digital forensics techniques that proved invaluable for recovering deleted files from Miles's home computer. The hospital cafeteria became an unlikely intelligence hub. I volunteered for the monthly Appreciation Breakfast Committee, which gave me legitimate reasons to spend hours in the hospital outside Miles's department. During these visits, I built relationships with nursing supervisors, maintenance managers, and administrative coordinators, people whose observations painted a detailed picture of department operations. Nancy, the charge nurse who had worked with Joel for 20 years before Miles took over, shared concerns about declining patient follow-up protocols. "Research patients used to receive comprehensive care," she explained during one breakfast setup. "Now they're rushed through assessments, sometimes by staff I've never seen before." The maintenance supervisor, Robert, mentioned peculiar equipment movements. "We're supposed to track all major medical devices," he noted while helping me arrange tables. "But Dr. Campbell's department moves things without proper documentation. Expensive items disappear from inventories. New equipment arrives without going through central processing." Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle, another perspective confirming that Miles's carefully constructed image masked systematic dysfunction and deception. Perhaps the most valuable hospital connection came from an unexpected source. Dr. Miriam Lawson, a senior neurologist who had been Miles's chief rival for department leadership. When I sought her guidance on understanding neurology research for a charity initiative, she offered insights that went beyond scientific explanations. "Your husband's publication record is certainly impressive," she observed carefully during our meeting. "Though some of us have wondered about the remarkably consistent outcomes across diverse patient populations." I caught the professional skepticism in her tone and decided to take a calculated risk. "Between us, Miriam, I've had similar questions." That opening led to a candid conversation about the statistical improbabilities in Miles's published studies, the research assistants who mysteriously left the program after questioning methods, and the growing concerns among ethical researchers in the field. "I've considered raising formal questions," Miriam admitted, "but without access to the raw data, which Miles guards zealously, it would be my word against his, and the hospital board is thoroughly charmed by their star neurosurgeon." By the time my investigation concluded, I had built a network throughout Riverside Memorial, not of conspirators, but of professionals who had shared their legitimate concerns, provided access to information within their purview, and helped complete the picture of Miles's fraudulent enterprise. None knew the full extent of my investigation or its purpose. Each believed they were helping with a discrete project, improving department processes, planning recognitions, supporting charity initiatives. Together, they had unknowingly contributed to building an airtight case against the man who had dismissed them as irrelevant to his grand ambitions. Miles had cultivated the hospital board and department heads, neglecting the network of dedicated professionals who actually kept the institution running. In doing so, he had created his own vulnerability, one I had methodically exploited. While building my case against Miles, I discovered something far worse than financial fraud or marital betrayal. Behind the embezzled funds and falsified research lay real victims, patients and families whose lives had been irreparably altered by Miles's deception. The realization came 6 weeks before our anniversary dinner. I was reviewing patient testimonials Miles had collected for a hospital fundraising brochure when a particular letter caught my attention. It was from a woman named Kelly Martinez, expressing profound gratitude for her father's participation in Miles's groundbreaking Alzheimer's treatment trial. "Dr. Campbell, words cannot express what your research has meant to our family," she wrote. "After Dad's diagnosis, we thought we'd lost him forever. But since starting your experimental protocol, we've seen glimpses of his old self returning. The extra time with him, truly with him, not just his physical presence, is a gift beyond measure." I recognize the trial she referenced, the same one funded by the $4.2 million grant, whose funds had largely been diverted to Miles's personal accounts. According to my investigation, less than a third of that money had actually gone to patient treatments. More disturbing, the breakthrough protocol described in Miles's published papers was largely fabricated, with reported outcomes manipulated to show success rates far beyond what any legitimate treatment had achieved. This wasn't just fraud, it was cruelty of the most intimate kind, giving false hope to desperate families, allowing them to believe in miracles while providing treatments Miles knew were ineffective. I located Kelly Martinez through social media and arranged a meeting, under the pretense of organizing patient testimonials for a charity event. We met at a coffee shop near the hospital, where she eagerly shared updates about her father's condition. "He's having more difficult days lately," she admitted, her optimism tinged with worry. "Dr. Campbell says that's normal, that progress isn't always linear. But the good days, they're worth everything." As she showed me photos of her father on her phone, a distinguished-looking man whose confused expression belied the improvements Miles had documented, I felt physically ill. The research notes I'd uncovered showed that Miles had classified Mr. Martinez as a notable success case in reports to the grant committee, claiming cognitive improvements that his actual medical records didn't support. Dr. Campbell mentioned, "Your father might qualify for the next phase of the treatment," I said carefully, testing how far the deception extended. "Yes." Her face brightened immediately. "He said they're seeing remarkable results in the Phase 2 trials. Dad's scheduled to begin next month, assuming his insurance approves the supplemental coverage." Insurance coverage for a treatment that didn't exist. Additional costs for a protocol that had never proven effective. The depth of the fraud was staggering. After meeting Kelly, I began identifying other patients from Miles's studies, cross-referencing the names I could access through hospital records with his published research. A pattern emerged: families desperate for hope, investing emotional and financial resources in treatments that showed temporary placebo effects at best, deliberate data manipulation at worst. The Alzheimer's trial had affected 28 families directly, with hundreds more waiting for the treatment to clear final research protocols and become widely available. The Parkinson's study had 11 participants whose symptoms Miles claimed had significantly reversed, a medical impossibility, given current scientific understanding. Most heartbreaking was the pediatric brain tumor research. Miles had published preliminary findings suggesting dramatic improvements in 5 children with previously inoperable tumors. The hospital had celebrated these results, creating a special pediatric neurosurgery wing based largely on the prestige and fundraising these breakthroughs generated. Through careful investigation, I discovered that 4 of the 5 children had shown no significant improvement, with standard medical records contradicting the outcomes reported in research publications. The 5th child, reported as the most dramatic success, had actually passed away 3 months before the study's published conclusion. I sat in my car after confirming this last detail, physically shaking with rage. Miles hadn't just stolen money or betrayed our marriage. He had exploited society's most vulnerable members, using their suffering as props in his elaborate facade of medical brilliance. The human cost extended beyond patients to young medical professionals whose careers Miles had compromised. Dr. Alicia Patel, a brilliant research fellow who had questioned statistical anomalies in study results, found herself suddenly removed from the team, her fellowship terminated with vague references to performance issues that damaged her reputation in the field. Marcus, Johnson, a lab technician who had noticed discrepancies between raw data and reported outcomes, was reassigned to basic administrative duties after raising concerns through proper channels. His subsequent complaint to the Hospital Ethics Committee mysteriously disappeared from official records. Even Miles's current research team, mostly young doctors and scientists who believed they were participating in groundbreaking work, were victims of a different sort. Their careers were now associated with fraudulent studies, their CVs listing publications that would eventually be retracted, their professional development built on experimental methods that didn't actually work. I compiled a separate file documenting these human impacts, keeping it distinct from the financial evidence. If Miles somehow managed to negotiate his way out of the embezzlement charges, this record of direct harm to patients would ensure he never practiced medicine again. The ethical violations extended beyond individual patients to the broader scientific community. Researchers worldwide had cited Miles's fraudulent studies, building their own work on his fabricated foundations. Medical protocols had been adjusted based on his reported successes. Hospital resources had been reallocated to support treatments that showed promise only in Miles's imagination. I arranged a confidential meeting with Dr. Joel Williams, Miles's mentor who had recently semi-retired. Though I couldn't reveal the full scope of my investigation, I carefully guided our conversation toward patient outcomes. Joel, I'm concerned about something Miles mentioned regarding the Alzheimer's study results, I began, watching his reaction closely. The flicker of hesitation in his eyes confirmed my suspicions. What specifically concerned you? He asked carefully. The consistency of the cognitive improvements across diverse patient profiles. It seems statistically unusual. Joel's shoulders sagged slightly, the professional mask momentarily slipping. I've had similar questions. When I've raised them, Miles has restricted my access to the raw data, citing confidentiality concerns. He studied me thoughtfully. This isn't just a wife's casual interest, is it, May? No, I admitted. It's not. The integrity of clinical research is sacred, Joel said after a long pause. It's the foundation upon which patient trust is built. If that foundation is compromised— He didn't finish the sentence, but his meaning was clear. As I compiled my evidence for the FBI and hospital board, I ensured the human impact remained central to my documentation. The financial fraud was substantial, millions of dollars diverted from their intended purpose. But the true crime was against the patients who had participated in manipulated studies, the families who had clung to false hope, and the broader medical community whose collective knowledge had been corrupted by fraudulent data. When I finally confronted Miles at our anniversary dinner, it wouldn't just be about our marriage or his betrayal with Shelley. It would be about all the others he had victimized, people whose suffering he had exploited for his advancement, whose trust he had betrayed far more profoundly than he had betrayed mine. They deserved justice as much as I did. Perhaps more. 3 years after Miles's passing, I stood at the podium in Stockholm, accepting the prestigious Karolinska Institute Award for my contributions to research integrity. The Grand Hall was filled with the world's leading medical minds, many of whom had implemented the Winters Protocol in their own institutions. Integrity in research isn't merely an ethical ideal, I told the assembled luminaries. It's the foundation upon which all medical progress must rest. Without it, we build not on bedrock, but on shifting sand. As I delivered my acceptance speech, I glimpsed Anna in the audience, now Dr. Anna Kirkland, having completed her PhD in medical ethics under a new identity. Our eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the unlikely journey that had brought us both to this moment. The woman who had once worn my grandmother's bracelet as a trophy now wore academic regalia, her transformation as complete as my own. After the ceremony, Joel Williams approached, leaning on his cane but eyes bright with pride. Now in his late 80s, He had traveled against medical advice to witness this recognition. "When I warned Miles about marrying someone with your investigative background," he said with quiet amusement. "This certainly wasn't what I anticipated." "Life rarely follows our expectations," I replied, helping him to a seat at the reception. "No," he agreed, watching the international gathering of scientists who had adopted my methodologies. "Sometimes it exceeds them." Later that evening, I received a call from Riverside Memorial's board chair. "Dr. Winters, we'd like to discuss renaming our Research Ethics Center in your honor. The board has voted unanimously." The irony was profound. The same hospital where Miles had built his fraudulent empire now wished to enshrine my name as a symbol of integrity. "I'm honored," I replied, "but with one condition. It must include a learning center about research, fraud cases. The greatest protection against future misconduct is understanding past failures." 2 months later, I returned to Riverside for the dedication ceremony of the Winters Center for Research Integrity. The state-of-the-art facility included not only verification laboratories and training spaces, but also a comprehensive archive of research fraud cases. Miles is prominent among them, though presented with clinical objectivity rather than personal connection. As I cut the ribbon, surrounded by hospital leadership and national media, I reflected on the journey that had led here. What had begun with a husband introducing his mistress as my upgrade at an anniversary dinner had culminated in a legacy that would shape medical research for generations. After the ceremony, a young resident approached me hesitantly. "Dr. Winters, I was one of Dr. Campbell's last students before everything came to light. I've struggled with reconciling what I learned from him technically with what he did ethically." I studied the young physician, seeing genuine distress. "The skills you learned are valid, even if the person who taught them failed his own standards. Your responsibility now is to apply those skills with the integrity he lacked." The resident looked relieved. "That's actually very helpful. Thank you." That evening, I dined with Kelly, who had recently been appointed to head the FBI's expanded healthcare fraud division, a promotion influenced by the success of our collaboration on Miles's case. "You know what's remarkable?" she mused over dinner. "What began as a personal revenge plan has probably saved more lives than all of Miles's legitimate medical work combined." I considered this. I never thought of it that way. "The Winters Protocol has already flagged 16 major research frauds that would have led to dangerous treatments," Kelly continued. "That's thousands of patients protected." Later, back in my hotel room, I opened my journal, a practice I'd maintained throughout this journey. My entry was reflective. 3 years ago today, Miles attempted to humiliate me by introducing Shelley as my replacement. In doing so, he unwittingly set in motion events that would not only end his career but transform mine. There's a lesson here about unintended consequences. How actions meant to diminish can instead elevate. How betrayal can lead to purpose beyond anything previously imagined. The following morning, I visited Miles's grave, a simple marker in the hospital cemetery, far from the grandiose memorial he would have once expected. I placed no flowers, performed no dramatic gestures. This wasn't about sentiment, but closure. "You tried to make me obsolete," I said quietly to the stone. "Instead, you made me necessary." As I turned to leave, I noticed a woman watching from a respectful distance, Miriam, Miles's sister. We had maintained sporadic contact since his death, our relationship complicated by shared history but not burdened by blame. "I thought I might find you here today," she said as I approached. The center dedication brought it all back. We walked together through the cemetery, an unlikely pair connected by a man who had betrayed us both in different ways. "He never understood. You," Miriam said after a while. "Not at the beginning, not at the end." "Few people truly do," I replied. "But understanding isn't necessary for justice or for growth." Miriam nodded. The work you're doing? It's extraordinary. Miles created a fiction about himself. You're creating a legacy of truth. That afternoon, I met with the editorial board of the New England Journal of Medicine, which was dedicating a special issue to research verification methodologies. My protocols had become standard practice at top-tier journals worldwide, with the Winters verification, now a recognized benchmark for publication. We're considering making your 3-phase verification mandatory for all submissions, the editor-in-chief explained. The improvement in data quality has been remarkable. As I reviewed their implementation plans, I reflected on the stark contrast between this constructive work and its origins in destructive betrayal. The path from that anniversary dinner to this international impact had been neither direct nor anticipated. That evening, I received an unexpected package at my hotel, a first edition of Medical Ethics in Practice, a book that had influenced me during my early career. Inside was a note from Joel. You've turned theory into practice, and in doing so, changed medicine. Your upgrade was of your own making. I smiled at his deliberate choice of words, reclaiming the term Miles had used so cruelly that night. The true upgrade had not been Shelley replacing me, but rather the transformation of my own life and work into something far more significant than the marriage Miles had discarded. As I prepared for my final presentation in a series of lectures at Harvard Medical School the next day, I reflected on the complete arc of this journey. What had begun with public humiliation had evolved into public recognition at the highest levels. What had started as personal revenge had transformed into professional revolution. Miles had brought his lover to our anniversary dinner to declare me obsolete. In that moment of cruelty, he had inadvertently launched me toward my greatest contribution, not as his wife, but as myself. The truest revenge wasn't the satisfaction of seeing him brought to justice, though that had certainly been warranted. It was the creation of something meaningful from the ashes of betrayal, a phoenix rising not through magic, but through methodical, purposeful rebuilding. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.